So I think the first question is always, why? Why do I need these guys? What are they going to do? How can they help me? And there's a lot of tough sells out there. The funny thing is that you were the toughest sell of all tough sells. I had started this method, and I had borrowed and copied from others that had taught me. And I looked at it, and I thought I had a good thing going. I really, really believed in my method, and I was doing a really nasty sexual assault case with your partner here in the Columbus area, and we were in the conference room, and we were prepping, and I had never met you before, and you walk in, and you watched us for about 5 minutes, and I could tell by the look on your face, like, oh no, and I knew what you were thinking, but what were you thinking?
Yeah. I mean, who's this guy coming into my office telling us how to try cases? And that's not without, I guess it needs some explanation, because, I had tried cases for a number of years at that point. You were working with my partner, and I was sort of involved in the peripheral only. And I sort of listened in on what was going on, and I just thought to myself, all right, he's coming in with all this stuff. We don't need any of this nonsense. And I just walked out. And now it turned out that later on, you and I ended up working that case together.
Yeah, I mean, life events sort of got in the way, and instead of your partner, I start working with you. And the case had been prepped for a while with your partner, but then you started getting involved in it and involved in the nuts and bolts of prepping the case. And I could tell that you weren't completely buying in. I mean, that you were participating without buying in, and it was clear you were smart. It was clear that you were talented. It was clear that you were experienced, but you just weren't completely sold, right? And I remember the date it changed. I remember the date the light bulb goes off. We're at the Ohio Bar Association, and well, you tell us.
Well, let's back up a second, because one of the problems that we're going to talk about, and one of the problems that we can help people solve, is ego. And trial lawyers, we need egos, and we have egos. And if we didn't have that, we wouldn't be good at what we did.
No.
And at the same time, that is also a quality that can kill our case. It's a quality that can torpedo what we're trying to do. So it's this cat and mouse game. And what you're talking about, the light bulb moment, is when I realized what was really in the way of my thinking. And it was my ego. I don't need this. I don't need somebody new telling me how to do this. I don't need to go through this nonsense of a process.
This touchy-feely kind of emotion.
Sure. Yeah, I don't need that. I can do this the way I've always done it. And the light bulb moment is when you realize the only thing in the way of success was that ego.
And it's one of those things where we will talk about the focus group process, and that's really the star of the show here. I mean, we do a full range of trial consulting and criminal defense consulting, but the real cherry on the sundae, the real star here, is the focus group process, and the prep for the focus group process, and the decompress from the focus group process. That focus group process is so important, and its beauty is in its simplicity, and its beauty is in its magic. You really do have to experience to see it happen once. Before you do, it's hard to explain it to someone, but once you see it, you don't need to explain it to someone. And you saw it for that first time, and your thoughts were?
Yeah, it's an amazing process, and what you get back from it is nothing short of incredible. And I can't overstate it, really, right. Because what it is we all go into cases, we all go into our jobs with some preconceived notion of what we're going to do. And the problem with this is we don't necessarily know that we have that preconceived notion. We don't necessarily know that we're walking into a case to treat it like another case that we had that might have been similar, because we know better.
It's those advocates' blinders, right? I mean, part of our job is to remove those advocates' blinders, because we are all there. When I'm the lawyer, I do it. When you're the lawyer, you do it. Mr. Smith walks into your office and says, Steve, I was at a bar last night. I was drinking with this girl. We left together. We had sex last night. It was consensual. We had a great time. And then this morning she tells me I raped her. I mean, the bias that's there is what's the first thing that goes through your mind?
I've already had this.
Of course.
I've done this before. I'm going to pull this out of my the bank in my brain that knows how to cross-examine that witness and knows how to argue that type of case. And I'm just going to use that argument. And you know what? It may not be bad, but it may not be right.
Mr. Smith is just like Mr. Jones and Mr. Satawa or Mr. Palmer. It's the same case. And I've done it before. I know how to do it. I have an opening. I have a closing. I have my cross-examination questions. Let's rock. And like you say, I mean, you always say that it might be 80% correct. It might be right 80% of the time. But the key is that it's not always right.
It's not always right, and you don't even know it. And you wouldn't even know it if you won the case or if you lost the case. You have to understand, you have to unmask that, so to speak, and get behind it to know that you're using the right strategy. Now, the problem is, and you said it, it's like we all do it. You do it, I do it. So the idea of consultation is not really about the way I was thinking, like, why do I need somebody to come in here and tell me how to do it and consult with it? I should have asked a different question. Why don't I want somebody to come in here and consult with me?
Well, to illustrate your last point, I mean, we've done it. I mean, you have a great term that you love to use, that what happens inevitably in every focus group we've always done together.
The pivot point.
It's the pivot point.
It's the pivot point where, and maybe we should back up and talk a little bit about the focus group, but we present to a focus group. It's not a mock trial. It's not like an opening statement. It's not designed to even look like a trial, but in its own abstract way, it mimics a trial, and it mimics the flow of evidence that might come out at a trial. And for the first hour, it gets bad, worse, horrible, and you're thinking as the trial attorney, why did I even decide to have a trial in this case? There's no way I can win. There's nothing I can do. Everything I've thought I was doing is now wrong. It's on its ear. And then there's the pivot point. There's that one question, like in the case we had.
So we are combined 50 plus years of trying criminal cases. You are smart and talented and experienced. I am smart and talented and experienced. And we took that case and we had prepped the you-know-what out of it. I mean, we did the deep dive. We had thought we had looked at this case every which way the case could be looked at. And we go into the focus group. And an hour and a half or 2 hours into this focus group, despite the fact that you and I had probably spent 30, 40 hours of prep on the facts of that case, we're in this focus group, and all of a sudden, I'll never forget her. I mean, she looks at you and she looks at me and she says, wait a minute, who bought the shots? I mean, they had done 8 shots, the complaining witness and the defendant, and they were drunk. I mean, they got drunk at a bar, and they did leave a bar together. And this woman looks at us and says, I got a question. I want to know who bought the shots.
You could hear a pin drop.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in the pin dropping, and we could hear a pin drop because we were both silenced. Why? Because we hadn't thought of that question.
And again, I mean, how could we not have thought about it? Well, because we were focused on the way this case was alike every other date rape, acquaintance rape case we've ever done, drawing on what has been successful for us in the past, drawing on our experience, drawing on our knowledge. Why would we go outside what was familiar and comfortable for us? Because it's been successful. But in that case, had we not done the focus group, that pivot point would have never been found. And that was the fact that there's no question in my mind, and I don't think in yours either, that that's the pivot point that won the case. That was the fact that won the case.
That's what made us realize that the path we were on, while maybe in the general direction correct.
75%, as you like to say.
Yeah, 75%, but it wasn't right. And that pivot point turns everything in a different direction, and it gave us what we needed to prepare the cross-examination, to prepare the direct examinations, to go investigate the facts that we didn't know because we hadn't asked that question, and how to stand up in the courtroom not only an opening statement and closing argument, and present it, how to unfold it and unwrap it for the jury in such a way that you hear those words at the end that we all want to hear, not guilty.
You know, and I think that as we go forward here today, we'll come back and draw on who bought the shots or the child sexual assault case involving an uncle and a niece in the Columbus area. And we'll use those as examples because I think that they illustrate much better the point we're trying to make than talking about this stuff theoretically. But before we get there, as you love to say, we should sort of start with the rules, right? We should start with the theoretical, and we've come up with a term for this. We like to sometimes call it the triangle preparation for trial, or the Aristotle triangle, and of course that stems at least in some part by sort of your interest in Greek philosophers and how the reasoning and rationale, the theory behind what we do and why it works is 3,000 years old.
Yeah, it's funny. So often we find ourselves doing things a certain way, and we can't really explain why or how or what's the philosophy or what's behind it, what's the theory behind it. And as I sat down and you and I sat down and really talked about this method that we've sort of developed over a decade now, it became clear that there's nothing really novel about it.
No, it's 3,000 years old.
You know, the Greeks were doing this thousands of years ago. And the idea is to take our theory and put it to the test. I mean, it really is that simple. Now, Aristotle came up with this how long ago? And now we call it something like the scientific method, right? So, and what's the scientific method really designed to do? It's designed to remove the bias you're talking about, the sort of the advocate's bias, or what I call confirmation bias, where we see what we want to see, where we explore the stuff that we want to be true, and we don't look at the other stuff. And, you know, again, 75% of the time that may be okay because our instincts are all good as trial lawyers. But if we employ something akin to the scientific method and we do it in the criminal defense trial preparation method, the results become magical.
You know, the one problem that we as lawyers all have is we go to law school and we have the lobotomy of a legal education where we don't think like regular people anymore. And I think that's where the Aristotle stuff becomes so incredibly important, because Aristotle said, again, 2,500 years ago or more, that rhetoric, the art of advocacy and convincing people of something that is true, involves three points. It's a three-legged structure: pathos, ethos, and logos. And we as lawyers are so focused on logos, logic, analytic. We go to law school for 3 years and we read cases and we get taught how to think like lawyers and write like lawyers, and we are so obsessed with the logos. And then you have the ethos, our reputation, the air of authority that we possess, and we work really hard on the way we dress and the way we speak and the way we do oral or even written advocacy. So we cover that one. And the missing link all the time is the pathos, is the emotion, is what is the emotional hot button of this case or this argument. And Aristotle taught us 2,500 years ago that is every bit as important as the other two.
You can't, what Aristotle realized, and what makes perfect sense even today, is that you got to have all three. You got to have a combination of those three things in order to present an effective argument. And, you know, each one helps define the other. They interrelate in sort of a non-quantifiable way. So in one situation, you may have a very logical argument that needs to be made, and there's not much emotion to it. But in another situation, the same logic can lead to emotions that you don't like, or an emotional response that maybe is better for the prosecution and not you. And your authority in a courtroom, I believe, is 100% dependent upon your confidence in your case. So if you go into a case and you're used to being the authority of whatever it is you're doing, because as lawyers, that's what we do, but you're not sure about your case. And the reason you're not sure about your case is because there's questions still hanging out there, questions that you haven't resolved, questions that we can help resolve through this process. Once you are sure, once you have committed, and once you believe it, that that's the right strategy, your authority goes through the roof. The logic of it goes through the roof. And now you know how to control the emotional response. That's what this process does.
And the reason I think this process is even better together, and you've done it alone without me, I've done it alone without you, but we do have a situation where the sum is truly greater than the parts, and when we do this together. And I know you always love to tell me that that I'm left-brained and you're right-brained, which is why you can play the classic guitar and I can't, but also why I can multiply 25 times 350 in my head and come up with the answer, and you can't remember to go to the doctor tomorrow, but the weird part of that is that me, the left brain guy, always seems so focused or more focused on the pathos, the emotion, and you, the right brain person, are always seemingly more focused on the logos, the logic, and I think most people would find that to be the opposite of the way it should be.
It's not that surprising, frankly, because we as humans, we tend to figure out what works in our worlds, right? You have to figure out what works in your life. You have to figure out what gets you up in the morning and to bed at night with a successful day. And for me, it requires a disciplined, logical approach to things because my tendency is to really go in 100 different directions. And I've learned over the years to sort of manage those two things, the chaos and the logic, or the creative and the logic at the same time. And it's been very helpful for me. And I suspect you're the same way, right? You have sort of an ordered way you go about things, and that tends to let you focus, or you tend to consciously or even subconsciously now focus on this emotional thing. And the irony of it is when we combine those two sort of subsets of personalities, so to speak, the results are bigger than what they would be alone.
And our anecdotal experience, our anecdotal, data suggests that you have hired me to help focus group and prep your own cases. And when that happens, I know you intentionally keep yourself out of the focus group prep. I mean, you are the lawyer, you are the advocate, and you for many reasons that we have already discussed and will continue to discuss, you know that you can't be part of that when you are the lawyer. And we'll talk about that in a minute here. But we've had two types of cases. Those cases where you've brought me in to do the consulting and I'm working alone with you as the lawyer, but also we've worked on cases where you and I have been the consultants together. And those are the cases where it just seems to be so much more effective at accomplishing the goal that you keep talking about.
Well, if the idea and the premise is that we're better off when we're working together with the common goal. In other words, we're moving together to accomplish something. Then it's better when we're doing that, right? So that is true. So if I'm working as the trial lawyer, I have to force myself out of that part of the equation. I can't be part of it. I can't be the one that is doing what you do. And then you then don't have my input in that. So it's not the same. And the opposite's true. So it's important and it's better when we're working together with somebody else who's responsible to be the quarterback of the case.
And to quote you already a few times today, I think there's a real reason, a simple answer as to why that happens. When the advocate tries to do this on his or her own, when they try to be the person prepping the case in this focus group type method, they go into that focus group and they try to, even subconsciously, try to get those mock jurors, those small focus group participants, to get to the conclusion they want them to get to. This is a sexual assault in a bar. We've talked about the 8 shots case. I want you to, my theory of defense is consent. I have the A, B, and C that are make up my theory of defense and of the consent case. And even subconsciously, without knowing, I'm sort of gently nudging those jurors to get to A, B, and C for me, because that's really what I want to hear. Whereas I come in, you come in, we come in together, we're outside. The magic in this process is really to let it happen organically, to not force those jurors to go anywhere they want to go, that they don't want to go, but rather to see where they take us. And maybe they take you to your exact theory of the case, and in which case now, hey, we got confirmation that you're on the right track and you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. But far more often, they'll take us to an acquittal. They'll take us to where you want to go, which is your client's liberty and a not guilty, but they do it in a different path. And the key, the secret, the magic of this process is not the conclusion they get to, but the way they get to it. It's the way they talk to each other. It's the questions and comments they interact with each other, the questions they ask us. Oh, please, we just want to know one more fact. And like that one woman in the one focus group said to us, something bothers me. Who bought the shots?
And it's that one question, that one pivot point that explains why we do what we do, why we need consultants to help us win our cases. It's why you need a consultant when you have your case. It's why I need a consultant when I have my case. It's not about our egos. It's not about our ability. It's not about whether we're good enough on our own to win the case, but we're better when we have the process behind us.